Good morning, Ahiah family. I am Reverend Karen Frost, filling in for Reverend Scott Olson today, and we are moving forward with our monthly theme of celebrating divine truth. And of all weeks to celebrate divine truth for this week, I find extremely relevant because this week's theme is about welcoming the shadow. And as we're experiencing the shadows of our lives, as we are looking at things in our country and our individual lives that are not working for us, that we have to go through a process of looking at, confronting what is in front of us so that we can heal it. And celebrating divine truth is how we do that, to recognize that regardless of what is happening in the world, regardless of what is happening in our lives, that divine truth is what gets us through it. Divine truth is what creates the opportunity for healing and for releasing of these qualities that no longer serve us. Carl Jung said everyone carries a shadow. The less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. I take that to mean that when we aren't looking at the shadows in our lives, when we are ignoring the fact that they exist, they're foreboding and looming over us. And more specifically, the experience of the fact that the United States is a white supremacist nation is something that I personally don't really feel comfortable talking about on a Sunday morning, but I recognize that now more than ever is a great time to do this. Now is the best time to have this conversation. One reason is because we're having this conversation in America, that as a Black person, I was not comfortable really speaking out about the existence of white supremacy and how it affects me personally on a day-to-day basis. I choose to focus on celebrating divine truth so that I choose not to focus on the fact that I feel oppressed in many environments that I'm in, or I feel most likely, I would say most often, I feel like I'm treated as an other. And one of the things that I genuinely appreciate about the Ahiah spiritual family is that I don't feel like an other here at all. With the marginalization or I would say the intersectionality of my identities, being a half Black, half Jewish lesbian, growing up with two different faiths, having my own opinions and ideas and interpretation on science of mind, I feel really welcome and supported and really feel like Ahiah is truly a beloved community. And the more that I get involved in this community, the more I learn about people's interest to dive in welcoming the shadow, in addressing the fact that we do live in a white supremacy, and each person doing their own healing work individually to address that. So right now, the Ahiah team, which there's a leadership team of people, which is Reverend Scott, Reverend Mike, Marsha Bradshaw, and Kelly Metcalf. I don't know why I'm blanking on everyone's names, but obviously I got there. And I are involved in this team of putting together the beloved community event where we have a conversation. We have these challenging conversations about race, confront them head on so that we are more comfortable having these conversations among the congregation, so that more of us are feeling the way that I'm feeling, that we can talk about anything that we want on a Sunday in the fellowship Zoom room, that each one of us feels welcome and truly feels like a part of the beloved community. And this event tomorrow is a great way of doing that, a great way of having a conversation about race that's designed in a way for us to welcome and confront and heal our shadow. Resmaa Menakem, who wrote the book My Grandmother's Hands, said, "In America, nearly all of us, regardless of our background or skin color, carry trauma in our bodies around the myth of race." So for me, specifically over the course of the summer, I was really confronted with this trauma head on as the riots in Los Angeles and around the country were heating up. And I personally, at the time, was working for a production company where we talk about race literally every day. And I'm used to it. This is what I moved to LA to do so that I can work in television and use television as a medium to inspire positive change, to inspire equality, to inspire unity. And working for Juvie Productions, I really felt like I was doing that. But what I hadn't realized up until this point of us having the conversation about race as a country is that I'd unconsciously chosen to shrink, to assimilate, to do the best that I can to agree with everyone around me instead of speaking up for my own truth. So much so that I didn't even know what my own truth was. I was so used to doing this work of making, just for lack of a better word, white people feel comfortable with my experience of my blackness, that I did the best that I could to be approachable, to be easy to talk to be someone that everyone can talk to about race. And so what I chose to do is put my own feelings, my own beliefs, my own experiences of oppression in the back burner, in the back pocket, never looked at it, didn't acknowledge it, made no effort to heal it at all whatsoever. And the experience, the conversation that we were having about race as a country really required me to look at it. It was no longer an option for me to deny the existence of my shadow. I had to choose to welcome it in. And so one of the ways that I chose to welcome my shadow was by taking diversity and inclusion classes through the Centers for Spiritual Living centers all over the country. And because of so many people are doing, everything is virtual and online right now, I have the opportunity to do that. One of the classes that I took was called Black in New Thought, it was put on by the Johnny Coleman Theological Institute, which is out of Chicago, my hometown. And it was really a great opportunity for me to meet with practitioners and ministers from across the country. I'd never been in a virtual space of 75 people, practitioner and ministers around the country, that are all identify as Black. And so that experience was really healing for me, just being in the room. I can't say that I got a whole lot out of the class, but being in the room, having the conversations that I felt like had never really taken place in the Centers for Spiritual Living, gave me an opportunity to welcome this shadow, to acknowledge the fact that I had never had this education before, but that I'm choosing to welcome it in and take these classes now. I took a class from the Center for Spiritual Living in Seattle that was led by Reverend Abigail Scherer, who's a good friend of mine. She leads the Next Gen Center for Spiritual Living retreat, which is for people who are like 19 to 40-ish, or 35-ish, I think is what they say. And Reverend Abigail led this. She used the book Cultural Consciousness, I believe it's called, or Sounds. I have it behind me. I'm just going to reach and get it because that's handy to record it in front of a bookshelf. Soundless Cries Don't Lead to Healing. Soundless Cries Don't Lead to Healing by Valencia D. Clay. And honestly, I was not a big fan of her class, and reached out to her afterward and said, "Hey, this is how I feel. This is how I felt of being the only Black person in this room." And she listened to me and did all of the things that a good minister does of, do you have any thoughts? Do you have any suggestions? Of course, it's not your job to tell me these things, but I am open and available to them. That kind of thing, where she really welcomed and encouraged the fact that it was difficult for me to say to a friend of mine, a spiritual leader that I revere and love and trust, that this class that she was leading felt like it was not designed for my Black voice. And so I realized that I'd had an opportunity to speak up and have uncomfortable conversations with my white friends in my life. And all of them really rose to the occasion. A lot of them chose to educate themselves reading books that I asked them to read. One of the books that I asked my friends to read was a book called The Miseducation of a Negro by Carter G. Woodson. And my mom and I will be leading a book study around this starting on January 17th. So look out for that. But this book really, what's interesting to me about it is it's written in, I believe it's in the 30s. And a lot of what the writer talks about with the African American community at that time is exactly what the African American community looks like in 2020. And reading something that took place so long ago, and to recognize how much things have not changed over the course of this time, really inspired me to, one, educate myself on how I can choose to make different decisions in my life. One of the examples that came out of the book, and something that I briefly mentioned earlier, was that it said that Black people are essentially socialized to always come in through the back door. And so, and metaphorically, Woodson says that if there isn't a back door, that Black people will go out of their way to find one so that they can always be hidden, come in through the back, not proclaiming out and proud and coming in like we deserve to be here. And I realized that that was how I'd chosen to live my life up until that point, that I've been shrinking so that I didn't make other people uncomfortable. And so confronting that within this book allowed me to choose to make more decisions of telling my truth more often, speaking up to my friends, asking my friends to read things that make them uncomfortable and have uncomfortable conversations, knowing that they get to be a better friend to me by understanding my experience as a Black person in America, and that I get to be a better friend to them by choosing to let them in to my experience, to no longer keep my white friends at a distance, but to truly acknowledge and honor that a friendship is works in two ways. I have to do the work of being vulnerable, and they have to do the work of being a safe place, safe space. And I'm so grateful that over the course of the summer that my friends, that my spiritual center, that my family has been willing to do this work with me. One of the things that I did was through Spirit Uncensored at the top of the month, the top of November, we had I forget that it's December already. It's going so quickly. At the top of November, right after the election, I held an event called America Unity and Civility that had both the Black and the white side of my family. And this was after a 7 day silent meditation retreat that I had given myself in the backyard. And so I was feeling super raw and emotional, going through an experience of a 7 day silent practice had brought up all kinds of feelings, all kinds of clarity, all kinds of healing, all kinds of opportunities to acknowledge and welcome my shadow. And so to lead this event the very next day after my 7 day retreat had ended, I was in a very raw emotional place. And even though I got it together, the videos on YouTube, on Spirit Uncensored's YouTube page, if anybody wants to check it out. But the experience of getting, I'm 39 years old and I have never gotten my white side and my Black side of my family together to have a conversation about race. Why would that be something that I do? Why would it be something that my family did? They're living their lives, doing their own thing. I am the one mixed race family member out of the family, and nobody had the thought to say, well, let's figure this out. Let's ensure this mixed race person in our family feels safe around her identity, so that, like, let's do everything that we can to ensure that the experience of living in a white supremacy really prevents us from thinking of things like this very often. That everyone in my family thought of me as somebody who they love. The white side of the family did not say, we didn't see you as a Black person. I saw you as my niece. I saw you as my cousin. And, the Black side of my family talks about race all the time. So my whiteness was present and accounted for. In fact, I actually felt really supported by my Black family in a way that it wasn't that I was unsupported by my white family, but the silence, the fact that we never talked about race, that we never acknowledged what my racial experience looks like, to me, that silence was really deafening. And to bring my family together to have that conversation was incredibly difficult. And I know that it's not the end of our healing journey. My mom and my aunt, my mother's sister, hopped off immediately after that event ended, and it hurt me a lot to put them in that situation, to feel as if I'm asking for a conversation about unity and civility, and at the same time, what that requires, what that is asking of my Black family members to do, is to really experience their trauma, confront their trauma, and address the fact that my white family members have never felt the need to acknowledge their experience of my Blackness and my mother's Blackness. And something that I give my white family a whole lot of credit for is that they acknowledge the fact that racism was the norm. When my parents got married, the white side of my family did not attend their wedding, specifically because racism was just that strong in their family and they were not comfortable attending a wedding. In fact, they sat Shiva for my father, as this is the Jewish side of my family. They pronounced him dead and sat Shiva and considered their relationship with him literally over. And around the time that my grandmother was starting to transition, she decided that she didn't want to leave this earth, leave this plane of action without healing this relationship with her son. And so she consciously chose to bring the family together. And that was when they started to address and confront the shadow of racism and the existence of racism within their own home, within their own family. I was 2 years old at the time. And so, because of that, I didn't have any real conscious awareness of that. And in fact, the fact that I have a memory of my 2 year old self asking why I'd never met this grandmother before. And the answer I was given, which was true, was that she lived in California for 2 years. And, I'm only 2 years old. She's in town. I'm going to meet her now. And for some reason, as my 2 year old brain, I didn't think to ask, well, what about all these other people? How come I never met any of these other people either? I think I just kind of assumed everybody was in California. And this is the reason for why I was in Chicago. This is the reason for why I'm meeting everybody now for the first time at 2 years old. And so I grew up in the shadow of the existence of how racism had such a significant impact on my own family. But we didn't, my parents told me about it at like 18, because that's inappropriate way, I think, in some ways to tell your child, hey, guess what? This is the thing from our past that's been a challenge for me, or a challenge in our family. But I wholeheartedly value and respect the fact that both sides of my family were willing to come together on the internet, on YouTube, to have a conversation about race, to acknowledge how racism has had an impact on all of them. And I feel like all of that contributes to our healing journey, that we are welcoming the shadow to allow for that healing to take place. Layla Saad in Me and White Supremacy said, there is no clean, comfortable, or convenient way to dismantle a violent system of oppression. There is no clean and comfortable or convenient way to dismantle a violent system of oppression. There just isn't. But we are celebrating divine truth this month. This is one of the many values and qualities that spirit has to provide for us, that regardless of the fact that it's not clean, comfortable, or convenient to do this work, spirit is available to support us and guide us every step of the way. And one of the ways that spirit is showing up is by inspiring the leadership team at Ahiah to put together this event of celebrating the beloved community, of honoring the beloved community, of each person doing their own individual work and coming together to be able to lead and serve other people as each one of us does our own individual work, as we do our own work of welcoming the shadow and trusting in divine truth to guide us through this healing journey. So I mentioned the people on the team, but I also mentioned that I took a Black and New Thought class, but I also took a class at Agape. I believe it was called Creating the Beloved Community, which is where we got this title for tomorrow's event at 7 p.m. in the virtual Zoom room. And Marcia Bradshaw was one of the facilitators for that class. Kelly Metcalf took the class. Reverend Mike took the class. And, all that happened was that Marcia Bradshaw sent an email out to the ministers and practitioners saying, hey, this class starts on Saturday. I think she sent the email out on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and she apologized for that. But, she invited us all to participate. And the fact that me and Reverend Mike and Kelly were ready and available and interested, and we didn't have a conversation on the side. I never said, hey, who's going to take this class with me? It was something that I knew that I needed to do for my own healing journey, and the two of them chose to do it for their own healing journey as well. And I know Reverend Scott would have done it. In fact, he said many times over that he would have loved to have taken this class, but he was teaching something else that night, so he was not able to do it. Something along those lines. I'm not going to speak for him. Just know that each spiritual leader in this movement, in our movement at the Ahiah Center for Spiritual Living specifically, is choosing to welcome the shadow, is doing our own individual work. I know that Kelly Metcalf was involved in leading the Me and White Supremacy group with Reverend Scott a few months ago, or maybe it's just a month ago. I'm not sure. I didn't take it because I do not identify as white. But what I have been taking, being somebody who identifies as Black, is I've been actively involved in the Ubuntu circles that meets every 2 weeks. We just had ours. It's every other week, and so the next Ubuntu circle for Black congregants, all are welcome to join, will be the Monday after the beloved community events. I can't remember what date that is. I think it's December 13th, but check your calendars. So the Ubuntu circles have been a fantastic space for me and my wife to really think about our belief systems around the Black community in America, to think about what we love about the Black community, to think about what we want to embrace more about the Black community, to be able to have a safe space to process and heal and discuss with other Black leaders within our movement and within the Ahiah community around racial division and inclusivity and exclusivity, that we have this safe space to heal. And Reverend Mike and Marsha and Annette Spence do such a wonderful job of putting this event on this morning. I generally, every other week, I generally give like the prayer at the end and say a little thing in the middle of it, but I give them all of the credit. I joined the leadership team late and was very passive, specifically because, as I said, I was doing a lot of healing work of my own and was doing the best that I can not to take too much on, not to overwhelm myself, because part of welcoming the shadow is acknowledging the fact that because it is not clean, because it is not comfortable, because it is not convenient to dismantle a violent system of oppression, that it is physically and emotionally and spiritually exhausting. And so I really had to choose to honor myself, to honor my journey, to not take on too many experiences of leadership, not to step out into the spotlight too often, because I was processing so much of my own feelings around the existence of white supremacy, my own participation in it, my own internalized racism. Acknowledging and looking at all of those things was so challenging for me that I really had to really lean in and honor my spiritual practice. And so this is something that we say pretty much every week at Ahiah, is spiritual practice is everything. And to be honest, I did not meditate daily until I had time with this pandemic. I had like a 160-day streak going on. I did miss Thanksgiving. That was the one day out of the last 160 days that I missed meditation. I did all kinds of prayer, but I did not meditate that day. And so it is what it is. I forgave myself and moved on. But spiritual practice, prayer, seeing a practitioner, there are a variety of resources available. There are books that we can read, a variety of resources available to help us welcome the shadow, to acknowledge the existence of white supremacy and truly healing it within our own country. So I'd like to invite us into an experience of prayer, of moving this energy away from the shadow and towards welcoming, towards celebrating the experience of our divine truth. And I invite you to join me in this experience of prayer by getting comfortable where you are, centering ourselves in the present in this moment, acknowledging that everything that has occurred in this country's history up until this point, that God has been present for all of it, that divine truth itself is changeless and is always unwavering, that it is always available to us, and that the light and the dark consists of God itself. There is no separation. God is all, light and dark, shadow and physical, that we are the allness of spirit itself, and that it expresses, and each person, each moment in history, each experience of life, divinity and God itself are present. And I know that each one of us is on our own perfect healing journey in relationship to who we are in white supremacy. Knowing that whether it is attending the beloved community event at 7 p.m. tomorrow, whether it is reading books like Me and White Supremacy in my grandmother's hands and attending the Ubuntu Circle, whatever healing experiences, whatever community resources, whatever books and prayers and treatments and meditations that we choose to do to heal our experience of racial division, is the right and perfect choice for each one of us. And I'm so grateful to be a part of a spiritual center where this conversation is welcomed, where it is encouraged, where spiritual leaders are doing their own individual work so that they can support each community member in doing their own individual work. And I am so, so, so grateful for the shift that takes place on the planet, because each person is choosing to participate in this experience of prayer, choosing to know that whatever is theirs to do is theirs to do. Whatever way is right for them to contribute to dismantling this violent system of oppression, that each person is doing their work, however that looks, however that consists, that we are welcoming the shadow into this experience and celebrating divine truth, knowing that spirit is available and supporting us every step of our journey. So I am so grateful for the conscious commitment being made to dismantle this system of oppression, grateful for the love that is shared and leaned into to know and trust that God is supporting us in our journey every step of the way, that all of the resources, information, clarity, understanding is all available to us. We simply have to choose to be open to receive. So in this moment, I choose to be open to receive, and I acknowledge and bless each person who chooses to join me in this experience of being open to receive whatever needs to be known in healing oppression and revealing divine truth. So I am so grateful to know this, grateful to speak this, grateful to celebrate this. As I let it be so, we affirm this by saying, and so it is. Amen.